Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton and welcome to this digital photo video lesson. The majority of landscape images rely on a high level of clarity and sharpness, making the most of any detail to lock the viewer's attention into the scene you've captured. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but in most cases you'll want front-to-back sharpness in your landscapes where both the foreground and the distant scenery are crisp and clear. There are several ways of achieving this in a landscape picture, such as using very small apertures like f/22 and beyond, or by employing hyperfocal distancing when focusing your shots, but both of these methods have their drawbacks. The former, though allowing you to capture a huge depth of field, tends to impact on the critical sharpness of a shot, because lenses aren't inherently at their best when using such small apertures. And it'll also result in a very long shutter speed where the minutest of vibrations while the shutter is open will also affect sharpness. As for the latter, hyperfocal distancing relies on having a lens with a distance window so you can accurately calculate where you need to focus for the maximum depth of field. Most lenses these days though don't have one, and to be honest, no one really wants to arse around with a tape measure when they could be taking pictures. So, this brings us neatly on to focus stacking, a system that allows you to render both subjects very close to the camera and those in the far distance in beautiful sharpness. Plus, you can do it very quickly and using any lens you like. And it's the focus stacking method that I've used to create this landscape, where, as you can see, we have pin sharpness all the way through the frame, right from these very close details in the foreground all the way through to those distant hills in the background. And if I just bring the layers palette onto the screen, for a moment you'll see how this picture was put together. Now, focus stacking simply requires you to take a series of separate exposures, altering the point of sharp focus each time you press the shutter, and then, back at home, blend them together using layers in Photoshop or Elements. And one of the many advantages of this system is that you can use the middle apertures of your lens like f8 or f11, where image quality and sharpness is usually a lot better. And in many ways this is a bit like shooting a bracketed exposure, but it's really one where we're interested in detail rather than different levels of brightness. So in this finished image we've combined all of our separately focused shots here. We've then flattened and straightened up the composition, made a few levels adjustments, just as we would do on any regular landscape, and then finished it off with a little bit of dodging and burning, just to bring out all that lovely detail. So, without further ado, let's see how it's done. I'll just minimize our finished image there, and bring up the 4 start images we're going to use, just by coming up to File and down to Open, and they are called Ashness 1, 2, 3 and 4. Now, if I just hold down the Shift key and highlight them all in the Open dialog box there and click Open, they'll all appear on screen. And in fact, just to clean up our workspace a bit, I'm going to go into our project bin and I'm going to close down the finished image. So the first thing that we need to do to get our technique off and running is make sure that we can see all of our pictures on screen at the same time. I'll just close that project bin. And then to see all the pictures, just come up to Window, down to Images and pick Tile, and that'll arrange them nicely on screen for you. What I then need to do is get all of the pictures into the same document so we can work on them using the Layers palette and start blending them together, keeping the point of sharp focus exactly where we want it in each separate frame. The way I'm going to do this is using the Move tool, and I'm going to drag all of our pictures into ashness1.jpg. So starting down here with Ashness 2, I'm going to click my left mouse button, hold that down, then hold down the Shift key on the keyboard and just drag it into Ashness 1. As soon as you see that plus sign appear next to the cursor there, just release the mouse button and it'll drop in. And then we can close down Ashness 2.jpg and we can do the same with Ashness 3, just making sure that you hold down that Shift key to keep everything aligned when you drop in that new image. Close it down, and then finally Ashness 4, just the same as before, dropping it in, closing it down, and then we can come out to a full view, just enlarge that layers palette a touch, and we can get started on blending those separate exposures together. And before we begin, I'm just going to take a quick look through the start images just to show you how we focused them ready for stacking together in Photoshop or Elements. So let's just turn off, to start with, our eye icons on the top 3 layers and go back to our original background image here. And if I just zoom in on that, you'll see that we've got a lovely sharp foreground here because we focused directly on the front of the stick here. In fact, I manual focused this area just to get it perfectly pin sharp, but as we move away it starts to drop off slightly, get a little bit softer, and then through to the distance it's sort of much too soft really for a landscape image, unless we were wanting to do something sort of very arty with a shallow depth of field. But if I just click back on some of these layers as we move through, you can see that the second layer we've added is a little softer in the very foreground, but we move through to better sharpness just a little further into the picture. Then the third of the images again is a little bit sharper as we move into the distance, and the final image, you can tell that we've focused right here on the bridge, and we've also managed to take in those distant hills and keep them nice and sharp too. So that's all the setup really involves, just keeping the camera nice and still and then moving the AF point around between your shots. And of course there are details of how to do that within the magazine. In this video lesson though, of course, we're just concerned with stacking these images together and blending them. So let's set about that right now. Now the layer that I want to work on first is layer 3, the very top layer where our distance is nice and sharp. And what I'm going to do is basically just use the eraser tool to delete the areas of this picture that aren't sharp. I'm going to continue that method all the way through the other frames until we have beautiful front to back sharpness. So we'll click on the eraser tool in the toolbox there, bring its size up to about 200 pixels, make sure that the opacity is set to 100%. And then because I don't want too much fuzziness between the different layers, what I'm going to do is just harden up the edge of the eraser tool a little bit, just holding on the shift key and pressing the right square bracket key. And if you keep your eye on that preview there, you can see that we've got the hard edge now. And now I'm just going to knock that back just once, just to ever so slightly soften the edge, but not have a very fuzzy edge, because that's not what we want. Then I'm going to zoom in to the picture, and the trick here before you start erasing is just to have a close look at where the sharpness begins to fall off on layer 3. So we can tell that on the bridge it's still nice and sharp, but really it's when we start to get to these rocks a little bit closer that we start to lose a little bit of that clarity. Now a great way to tell where the sharpness is beginning to fall away is just to click on and off the eye icon in the layers palette, and yeah, you can see that particularly around this area on the left hand side we're certainly getting a lot more sharpness from layer 2, which is going to be visible under layer 3 when we start deleting those pixels. So with layer 3 still highlighted and the eraser tool all set up nicely, we can now just start to begin clicking and erasing through onto that layer below. And there you can see I'm just starting to bring back that sharpness. Not going too much further up above these rocks, because that's where the shot is nice and sharp on layer 3. And then we'll just keep kind of erasing along, sort of trying to follow this line of the rock really, as it just dips down there towards the water. And then we'll sweep across very quickly to the other side, and then just bring it up on the other side of the picture. Something sort of round about there should be okay. And then we'll just click on and off the eye icon again just to make sure that these rocks are still nice and sharp on layer 3. They look okay to me. So then we can come out to a full view again, and then just basically enlarge the eraser tool, just bringing it up using that right hand square bracket key again, not pressing shift this time, so we just control the size of the brush. And then we'll just start clicking and erasing all the way down to the bottom of the picture. And there, as you can see, as I do that, it's getting a little bit sharper, not quite as sharp as we'd want. And there also within the layers palette you can see this whole area filling up with the checkerboard effect, and that's just telling us that that whole area is transparent now and we can see through the pixels that are underneath it. So we've managed to delete all of those unsharp areas that we don't want, but what I'm going to do just before I continue on to the next layer is just do something slightly different in the water. I'm going to take that brush sharpness right down to 0 so that it's got a nice soft edge, and then just very delicately kind of click around the water so that we get a nice smooth effect there. Not what we want in the rocks, but in the water it's going to work out quite nicely. So now we've pretty much established a pattern of how we're going to move through these different layers. We can click on layer 2, bring our edge hardness of our eraser tool back up to where we want it, just one sort of notch below full hardness, and then zooming back into the picture a little, we can once again just click on and off that eye icon, the layer 2 eye icon this time, and we can see that it's still nice and sharp all the way down. So let's scroll down a little bit further, and it's just around here, I think, really, that we're starting to lose a little bit of that clarity again. So that's where we're going to start erasing. Just bringing back through those sharper areas. I'll just drag that layers palette off to one side for a moment, and we'll continue to erase through, just taking out all those fuzzy parts of the image, right the way down to the bottom of the frame. We don't want to leave any of those areas that aren't perfectly sharp. And let's just bring that layers palette back on there. We'll click on and off the eye icon again, and we can see that it actually looks a little bit sharper on the opposite side of the water there as well. So I think we're going to move the brush over there just a little bit, and once again just bring that hardness of the eraser tool down so that we get a nice even blend when we're working on the water. So that's looking pretty good. And finally we can click on layer 1. We can run our little test again, taking on and off that eye icon, just seeing that sharpness come through from the background layer. And you may notice there's a little bit of a shift in where the pixels line up between the layers here, just an ever such a very gradual shift, and that can sometimes happen when you're pushing the focus of the lens to its extremes. You can get a little bit of a change in the framing. It's not going to affect us too badly here though, so we've now got layer 1 highlighted in the layers palette, and we can continue our job of just clicking and deleting those fuzzy areas. Just knock that hardness back up on the eraser tool. We're not going to go too far into the picture this time because, again, clicking on and off, we can see that we've got some fairly nice kind of sharpness going on here, but we do want to bring it back on those nice details on the stick there. And also because the sun came out a little bit when we were shooting this lowest focus point in our separate exposures, we lit it up a bit nicer. So I'm going to just kind of erase through those parts that I want to be nice and sharp. So for this lowest layer here, you can see that we've reduced the least amount of pixels, really just working on this bottom left hand corner. But if I now click and scroll back up through the image, you can see that we've basically achieved exactly what we wanted to. We've got our pin sharpness right down here in the foreground, and we've retained it all the way through the picture right up to the background. And that is really all there is to focus stacking in Photoshop or Elements. A very quick and easy way of getting a fantastic level of front to back sharpness in your shots. We'll just come back out to a full view, and you can see there in the layers palette that just with that very simple method of erasing the fuzzy, unsharp parts of the image that we didn't want, we've locked all of those separate exposures together, and we've achieved this really wonderful level of clarity in our landscape picture. So now that our focus stacking is completed, beyond this point we're really just working on the image as if it was any regular landscape, just improving the contrast a little bit, and also using the dodge and burn tools to bring out and make the most of all that lovely detail that we've uncovered by shooting those separate exposures and blending them together. Before we get started, I'm just going to come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image, just to combine all of our separate layers there. And then I first want to just straighten up the image a little bit using the crop tool, so I'll click on that in the toolbox. And because we've got this kind of rocky, uneven foreground with no straight lines in it, and the bridge there, Ashnet's bridge, obviously wasn't built with any particular spirit level, I'm going to use this far off bit of the horizon here that's just visible through the trees, just to set our straightness. I'm first, using the crop tool, just going to come up to the aspect ratio in the options bar and set that to use photo ratio. which will keep the dimensions the same after our crop. So I'm just going to click and drag out the crop tool very limitedly just over that area now, and then I'm going to position the cursor outside of the crop tool and then just click and drag to rotate it ever so slightly. And here I'm just really looking to match up the line, the top of the cropping marquee there with that line of the horizon. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but something around about there should be okay. And then we can just use those corner handles just to click and drag out our cropping marquee, taking in all of those parts of the shot that we want to keep. In fact, I'm just going to rotate it back ever so slightly so that we don't lose too much of it. And when you've got something around about like that, just click the tick or hit return on the keyboard. So that's straightened things up nicely, and now we can take a quick look at working on the contrast of the image, particularly darkening this sky a bit because it's fighting with the foreground a little bit. And we can do that first by just clicking on the lasso tool icon in the toolbox, drawing out a quick selection over the top part of the image, then coming up to the options bar, clicking on refine edge, and I'm going to set our feathering up at the maximum of 250 pixels in this case. Click OK. And then we'll add a levels adjustment layer to control the brightness and the contrast of the image in this area. So when Photoshop's done thinking, I can click on the create new adjustment layer icon, pick levels from the list, and then in the palette that appears, I'm first just going to click and drag that mid-tone slider over to the right. And then I'm also going to drag the white output level over to the left a little bit, just taking some of that white out. Something around about there should be okay. We don't want to darken it too artificially, but that's kind of looking okay, I think. And because we're using Photoshop Elements 8, here we don't have an OK button. If you are using an earlier version, you'll have an OK button to press, but in this case we can just click off the palette. And then we can do something very similar in the foreground, just first making a quick selection of this bottom right hand portion of the image. Just feathering that again, this time probably by no more than about 100 pixels. Clicking OK, and then we'll add another little levels adjustment layer there, and this time do the opposite to what we did above. I'm just going to brighten that area slightly just to balance up that foreground. So something about there, it looks okay. Also just drag that mid-tone slider over to the right a touch just to bring in a little bit more contrast. And once again, exit the palette. And finally, for the contrast in this image, much like we've done for some of the other pictures in this month's guide to shooting great landscapes, I'm going to use the dodge and burn tools to just lift some of the detail a little bit. So first I'm going to just create a new layer in the layers palette, just clicking on the create new layer icon there. And then I'm just going to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, come up, and with it still held down, just click on Merge Visible within the layer menu. That'll merge all of these separate layers onto our new layer and give us somewhere where we can do our dodging and burning without disrupting the rest of the image. So let's just zoom in a little bit on our shot. And I think I'll start in the foreground just by lightening some of these textures in the rocks using the dodge tool. So give that a click in the toolbox, set its size down at around 200 pixels in this case, I think. Make sure the range is set to highlights and the exposure is at around sort of 3 or 4 or 5%, a nice low exposure. And then we can simply start running the dodge tool over the areas of the image that we want to lighten, just bringing out a bit of extra detail, just bringing up the kind of the texture in those rocky areas. And though people tend to associate the dodge and burn tools a little bit more with working in mono, and they are very useful when using that style, they can be used in colour just as effectively as you'll see in this case. So we'll just keep working around that foreground. Try not to run the tool over these very light areas of the stick because we don't want to make them any brighter than they already are. And then what I'm going to do is move up through the image, just kind of working on the tonal areas that I want to lighten. Particularly on the bridge here, I'm going to zoom in on that area and I'm going to work it over the stonework there, just bringing out that detail so that it's a little bit more eye-catching in our picture. And it's a good idea just to click on and off your dodge and burn layer as you go, just seeing how those changes are affecting the picture. And that's kind of given it a bit more impact there, I think. So we can switch over to the burn tool. Once again, bring the size down to about 300 pixels. Make sure its range is set to shadows this time. The exposure looks good in this case. And then we can do exactly the same, just running it over those parts of the picture where we want to introduce a little more contrast. Of course, we don't want to run it over the whole image. We don't want these kind of changes to be done in a blanket kind of way, otherwise we'd use an unselected levels adjustment. But here we're simply working on the areas very specifically that we want to darken. And just scrolling down through the image just to bring up these darker areas in the rocks and just show off all that lovely sharpness that we've introduced with our focus stacking technique, working along the stick here to bring out that detail, just clicking on and off the layer there to see how it's affecting it. It's just kind of making it a lot more sort of vibrant and punchy. All of these kind of foreground areas can be given a good run over with the burn tool. Bring that over, keep on working on these rocks too. And of course this is one of those things that, as we often say, you can spend a lot more time working on when you're editing your own images. But just coming back out to a full view there, and once again clicking on and off that layer 1 eye icon, you can see that we've certainly added a little bit more punch to the image and brought out those details in a really pleasing way. Okay, so that's our focus stacking technique completed, and we've ended up with this really fantastic landscape image that's got this huge depth of field extending right from those lovely sharp details in the foreground all the way to those distant hills. The only thing left to do is come up to layer and down to flatten image, just collapse the whole thing into a single background layer, and then we'll just make the most of all those details by adding a little bit of unsharp mask. So if you're using more modern versions of Photoshop Elements like I am, you'll need to come up to Enhance and down to Unsharp Mask, or if you're using other versions of Photoshop, you'll find it under Filter, down to Sharpen and pick Unsharp Mask there. Give it a click and you'll see pretty much the same box though, and in here we'll just add a little bit of extra sharpness by setting the amount to around 100%, the radius to 1 pixel, and the threshold to 2 levels. And if you just click on and off within the preview box here, you can see how that sharpness is being applied, just bringing out those details even more vividly than we managed with our focus stacking technique, and just tying the whole project together really nicely. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. Take a look in the magazine to see how we shot the raw materials for our focus stacking technique, and then give it a go with your own pictures. See you next time.